There's a piece of history that keeps playing itself over and over again on a distant battlefield halfway across the globe. It's a story older than a lifetime, but so chilling it feels alive today. Let me tell you about an uncanny phenomenon that has haunted a war-torn land for over a century. Welcome to the Nightside Archive. This episode, the ghostly drummer of Gallipoli. Let's set the stage to the year 1915. The Gallipoli campaign, a bitter, bloody chapter of World War I, fought on the rugged shores of modern-day Turkey. The cliffs there stand steep, battered by relentless waves, whispering secrets carried on the salt-laden sea breeze. As armies clashed for the control of the Dardanelles, soldiers claimed they weren't just battling against enemies. They were up against something far more ethereal. The accounts we'll delve into tonight don't come from historians or war strategists, but from those who stood in the trenches, their boots stuck in bloodied mud. British and Anzac troops weren't prepared for what they started witnessing by the eerie silence of Gallipoli nights. A spectral figure, illuminated not by the moon, but as if its very essence glowed faintly against the smoky battlefield. Soldiers called him the drummer, a gaunt form dressed in tatters resembling an 18th century British Army uniform who appeared between battles with a small snare drum strapped to his chest. And oh, he didn't march silently. He played. That's right. The faint ghostly staccato of his drum reverberated through the valleys. It was a sound that seemed to tighten the chest and make breaths grow shallow. Who, or what, was he? Some believed he was an omen, a spirit drumming in the enemy's favor, signaling raids and upcoming bloodshed. Others whispered about a deeper curse, the idea that his presence was revenge, tied to the colonial soldiers trampling unwelcomed on Turkish lands. One soldier, Private Alfred Hutchins of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, later recounted a nightmarish experience in a letter to his wife. He claimed to have locked eyes with the drummer from his muddy post under starlight. Hutchins swore the figure stopped playing and stared directly back at him. Then, in almost a blink, the figure began to walk forward, fading as though becoming part of the air itself. That same night, Hutchins's battalion suffered unfathomable losses in an ambush. But the ghostly character isn't confined to the battlefield stories of one regiment. Accounts came from groups stationed miles apart. Some insisted the strange drum beats existed even when artillery had fallen silent, amplified by nature into rhythms too deliberate to be random. Scholars of folklore dismissed the tales as battlefield hysteria or signs of shell shock. But anecdote piled upon anecdote. A Turkish officer captured in a raid reportedly shivered when asked if he and his men had ever seen anything strange. Speaking through an interpreter, the officer described his men also hearing the drums, an unrelenting echo emerging from the hills, louder than it had any right to be. They had something else to add. Each time they heard the drumming, horses in their ranks would whinny and kick, as if grasping fear in their very marrow. Modern-day folklorists have tried to piece this legend together with historical roots. Some theorize the apparition harkens to earlier conflicts fought on the same soil, a vestige of British troops during the Napoleonic Wars, leaving behind a spirit so restless it wandered back as new atrocities unfolded. Others argue that the drummer was never of this earth at all, but rather an embodiment of war itself. Grief, pain, and terror made manifest. One particularly unexplainable occurrence is detailed in the war diary of Corporal George Landers, an Australian signalman. On July 28, 1915, he recorded an encounter where his troop described hearing the faint drum roll during a routine patrol. Yet here's where it gets chilling. Each soldier reported hearing it coming from a different direction. For one, the sound came from the left ridge. For another, from the open sea. Embellishment, possibly. But Landers concluded his journal entry simply, "When the beat faded, it sounded as though my heartbeat itself had stopped keeping time." Could this spectral drummer have followed the trenches of Europe, taking up rhythms in fields of death to remind soldiers of their mortality? Evidence of drumming apparitions has eerily coincided with other battles across continents, though none so consistent as that of Gallipoli. Recent visitors to the now peaceful peninsula echo stories passed down generations. Hikers have described hearing distant rhythmic beats in areas where no visible presence exists to account for them. For the brave handful that journeyed there under a full moon, reports tell of an inexplicable chill in the very air. An eminent British ghost historian, Jane Crook, once led a paranormal investigation to Gallipoli in the early 2000s. Mysterious audio recordings picked up faint but distinct tapping sounds, irregular and untouched by the equipment's usual mechanical quirks. While skeptics debunked her recordings as wind and vibrations, Crook was sure of one thing: the land bore signs of continuous energy, as if the imprint of violent history left the world around it perpetually vibrating. So, how do these stories affect us in our comfortable homes, far from trenches and haunted shores? Whether you dismiss the legend as fantasy or take pause at the possibility that centuries of violence could forge a lingering resonance, the ghostly drummer of Gallipoli endures like the beating of a drum itself. It's a story untamed by time, whispered among soldiers who swear some pieces of history resist surrender. Wars may end, battles may quiet, but some echoes never truly fade. So the next time you hear a faint rhythmic beating in the whispered quiet of the night, consider this: is it just a noise? Or has the drummer come to remind you of truths far older than any battlefield tale? I'll leave you to wonder.